Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I am Cadet Jared Walker from North Point High School. Today it is my great honor to introduce to you this morning Mr. Norval Dillard, serves as Director of Diversity and Inclusion Management and Strategic Communications for the Office of the Secretary of Defense, Office of Diversity Management and Equal Opportunity. As the Director of D&I Management and Strategic Communications, Mr. Dillard provides oversight and strategic guidance to D&I, EO, and EEO specialists and personnel across the Department of Defense, a 2.7 million person enterprise. He provides advice and guidance to DoD leadership and the highest level, including the military services and the defense agencies concerning all diversity and inclusion management and compliance issues. Prior his current assignment, Mr. Dillard served as strategic manager and technical expert in strategic communications. He was also an advisor to the Deputy Assistant Director of the Army and the Assistant Secretary of the Army for Manpower and Reserve Affairs. Prior to this assignment, he served for 15 months as a Diversity and Leadership Principal Deputy with duties as the Deputy Assistant Director of Army. Mr. Dillard retired as a colonel from the active Army in 2008. After serving more than 26 years in numerous command and staff positions, Mr. Dillard graduated as a distinguished military graduate with a bachelor's degree in mass communication from North Fork State University, a dual master's degree in management and a computer resource management from Webster University, and a master's degree in national resource strategies from the Industrial College of the Armed Forces. He is a graduate of the Army of the Asian American Government Executive Network, Senior Executive Service Development Program, and is an Office of Personnel Management certified game changer, as well as a certified diversity professional. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me in welcoming Mr. Dillard Norval.
First off, I was sitting there thinking as Jared was reading, trying to figure out who he was talking about. And then I realized he read that just as my mother wrote that for him. So I appreciate that very much. I want to say good morning, and thank you for the kind introduction, Jerry. You did a magnificent job. I want to acknowledge all dignitaries that are here. Certainly, it's a pleasure to be here. All that have been recognized at the head table. I want to say thank you to certainly Mr. Jerry Burton, your president here. Let's give him a round of applause. But I also want to say thank you to Chief Frank Killebrew. Where are you, Frank? Raise your hand. You know, if it wasn't for a non-commissioned officer, I wouldn't be here today. So y'all have to give it up for the non-commissioned officer to keep these officers straight. I'm telling you what I know, for real. So thank you very much for everything you did to make this easy, Chief. But also acknowledge all the students, the parents and friends. On behalf of Mr. Clarence C.J. Johnson, the Director of the Office of Diversity Management and Equal Opportunity, I would like to thank the Tuskegee Airmen and the East Coast chapter for inviting him to speak this morning at such an exciting event. Now, he truly wanted to be here. Unfortunately, he had death in the family, so he's attending the family. And I personally thank you for your leadership and for all that you do to recognize and cultivate our nation's next generation of leaders to make the world a better place. So ask you to give it up for yourselves for doing that. You know, someone who's often overlooked, thank you to the parents that joined us this morning. And we thank you all for the support of your children's education, their ambition, and their dreams. So, parents. I've enjoyed myself this morning. It's an honor to be here, and I'm truly humbled to be in the presence of so many distinguished guests and bright young minds. I've met a couple of them that pre-med they want to go into. They want to be lawyers, criminal justice, and it gives me joy to hear that. I know that I think I was a sophomore in college before I realized what I wanted to major in. I said, you can't be in general studies your whole life. You got to make up your mind. So we're talking about folks in the 10th grade that's talking about doing this. So I'm impressed with that. As many of you know, in February, the nation comes together to celebrate National African American History Month. During this time, we deepen our understanding of African American contributions, accomplishments, and service to the entire nation. Well, this year's theme is hallowed grounds, sites of African American memories. Reminds us that the imprint of African Americans is deeply embedded in the narrative of the American past, present, and future. The famous abolitionist and orator Frederick Douglass once stated, "If there is no struggle, there is no progress." Today, as we talk about Black history, I'd like to do something a little different. And I love I love my supervisor, Mr. Johnson. I told him, I said, "Sir, I want to do something a little different. Because of the audience, I want to take a train ride." He said, "Tell him about the train, Rock." I said, "Okay, that's what I want to do." Because, you see, there's history and there's his or her story. Well, for all too often, unfortunately, too many years, the true history has not been told. So we'll tell his or her story today. You see, to do this, I'd like to take you all on a train ride. In fact, several trains from the Revolutionary War until today. Now, I digress to tell you that I'm an avid train rider. I live near Baltimore. I've rode the train to Washington, D.C. every day for almost 8 years. I think I'm qualified. Other than when I have to drive in and work with the traffic and all that kind of stuff, I'm on the MARC train. Give it up for the MARC train, folks. I'm telling you, my brother and them, they live in Virginia. I'm from Virginia. Boy, where is our MARC train? I don't know. You get your own. But the train ride we're going to be on today is called the Train for Freedom. See, I want this train ride to help you better understand the impact that Blacks have had on the military, this country, and the world. Therefore, I'm going to ask something of you. I'm going to ask you to use your most vivid imagination and come aboard. Many who have had tremendous impact on history that have created the hallowed grounds that we remember today. Now, this train goes way back in time. Now I can see the train is about to take off. All aboard! The train slowly departs as people share gentle glances and short smiles that they are finally on the way. As the train picks up speed, many glance out of the window because they want to soon get off the train to take an active part in fighting for a nation that did not want them to fight for their freedom. After some time traveling, the train began to slow down, soon coming to a stop. The conductor let off a mighty yell, "First stop, Boston!" As the people looked out the window, they noticed that times were different. It was March 5th, 1770. March 5th is my birthday, by the way. And the streets of Boston were full of British redcoats and angry citizens, while on the train, a 6'2" man, anybody here 6'2", by the name of Crispus Attucks, stood up and got off the train. See, this was a time when there was much talk about North American colonies being free from English tyranny. The citizens felt that there was too much taxation without representation, and the redcoats had been sent there to enforce those rules. The citizens were angry over the presence of those soldiers, so they threatened the soldiers with sticks and stones and rocks. And the troops immediately turned, fired on the rebellious colonists, and the first to be shot was Crispus Attucks, the first casualty of the Boston Massacre in Boston, Massachusetts, and is widely considered to be the first American casualty in the American Revolutionary War. It was at that time the train began to pull off, as all on board looked out the windows to see the first to die in the Revolutionary War to protect the freedom of this nation laying on the street in the hallowed grounds of Boston, Massachusetts. Well, the train continued on a time where during the American Revolution in 1776, New York passed a law that allowed white men who had been drafted to send free blacks to enlist. So the train, as we ride, continued through time where there were 4 all-black units we would see standing proudly in large formations as we traveled down the road. Formations in Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and Connecticut. There was a company in Massachusetts that had a black commander. Also in the Continental Navy, many black sailors served on Revolutionary gunboats. There's one black man named Captain Mark Starling of the Virginia's Navy was a commander of the Patriot. After the war was over, despite the successful battle record, he was re-enslaved by his master. The train continued past these formations of black soldiers who also served valiantly in the War of 1812, where blacks still fought, hoping to earn their freedom, where many were returned to their masters. Now the train begins to build up momentum. This time a lot faster because it goes down south and it continues to a place where I believe only the driver of the train and the person that was about to get off the train at the next destination knows the location. As the train begins to slow down, the conductor yells, "Next stop, top secret location, destination unknown." Everybody's looking around nervously to see what in the world's going on, where we might be. When a determined small black woman hurriedly gets up from her seat as she looks over her shoulder at the driver, gives a slight smile, a nod, and quickly exits the train. As the people on the train, we all watch from the window. She looks around once again and disappears into the wood line. For that woman was none other than Harriet Tubman. See, Harriet Tubman had served as a nurse, a scout, intelligence agent, and had been reported that she had made many a raid inside enemy lines, displaying remarkable courage, zeal, and fidelity. Harriet was sought after so heavily for the number of slaves she had freed and the problems she caused the Confederates, they had a reward out for $40,000. Now, I know we have some folks that works at Treasury and other places. What would $40,000 then be today? A lot of money. As Harriet's no longer seen in the wood line, the train once again begins to move. See, we travel now to Washington for the signing of one of the most important documents in black history, as many ride by slowly to witness the signing of the Emancipation Proclamation. For the Emancipation Proclamation freed the slaves in all the states that left the Union. The proclamation also permitted blacks to serve in the military. Now, with great announcement, we're all happy as the train continues to travel. People started to notice a group of people sitting together as a group of professionals, well-dressed, that few people knew anything about during the time. See, many histories have been written about medical care during the American Civil War. But participation and contributions of African Americans as nurses, surgeons, and hospital workers have often been overlooked. See, the train comes to a halt at a hospital in Washington, D.C. African Americans, free and enslaved, provided care for wounded soldiers in the Union and some Confederate hospitals. The survival of the military hospital was dependent upon their work. Hospital work represented change and opportunity for African Americans. Most African American surgeons during the war were assigned to military hospitals and recruiting stations because the whites did not want to serve beside them, and they certainly didn't want to work for them. The first to exit the train, Dr. Alexander T. Augusta, who was freeborn in Norfolk in 1825. Now, Dr. Augusta was a veteran of the American Civil War and the first commissioned black officer in the U.S. Army in 1863. He's also the first black officer to be buried in Arlington National Cemetery. Now, Dr. John V. DeGrasse was the next to step off the train. He was the other one of the 2 black physicians who received a commission in the Army, was the only black surgeon to serve in the field with a regiment. Nurses, both women and men, worked for the Union Army hospitals and on the battlefields. Now, though most had no formal training, they provided care and comfort to thousands of soldiers and civilians. As two nurses exited off the train, named Susan King and Ann Stokes, who were former slaves who gained their freedom as the Union took over Confederate strongholds in the South. Shortly thereafter, this time period, the Confederacy was dead. Everyone on the train was happy. However, we look around and everybody's got solemn moods. The heads are down, hung low. You see, unfortunately, on April 15th, Abraham Lincoln was dead as he was assassinated by John Wilkes Booth. Everyone was in total shock. You're talking about the president. We all peer from the windows as we see crowds who had viewed as he lay in his state. This day, our train yields as we watch his funeral draped train as it disappears on a separate track for Illinois to his final burial state. Now, after watching President Lincoln's train disappear down the tracks in the distance, President, you'll like this. The train takes off towards the west to Ohio, where it stopped to let off the highest ranking black officer during World War I. He graduated from West Point in 1889, was a man with considerable intellectual ability. This man was Colonel Charles Young, who was proficient in 6 languages. He was a musician, composer, and author. He represented the countless number of Buffalo soldiers that had served on freedom's frontier during the Civil War, during the Indian War, and Spanish-American wars, and throughout history. You see, when World War I broke out, he was the highest ranking black in U.S. history. He was ready to continue his duty and thought to be the first black in line to make general, but had an unpleasant surprise. I think the official explanation that U.S. doctors found him to be unfit for the military because of high blood pressure. He was dismissed from the Army. And I love this man because Colonel Charles Young protested that he was not sick, and one doctor said the same. So to prove he was fit, Colonel Charles Young mounted his horse on the hallowed grounds of Wilberforce, Ohio, and he rode that horse all the way to Washington, D.C. He pled his case to the War Department. He got back on his horse, and he rode all the way back. Now, I ride Harleys. I rode up to Ohio before I told him I ride to Canada, and I get tired. Now, that horse don't have a motor. But Colonel Charles Young did that, and guess what? He was reinstated. He was reinstated back on active duty. But 3 decades later, he died while on an expedition in Nigeria in 1922, and he laid to rest with full military honors in the Arlington Military Cemetery. Now the train starts off again, slowly from Arlington, as everyone on the train renders a salute to the phenomenal leader that was honored in his flag-draped casket. Now the train doesn't go too far as it starts slowly off again as the conductor yells at the next stop for a man who had a distinguished career of over 50 years. The soldier stands proud as the first black to make general. Benjamin O. Davis Sr. Now, a lot of people don't know this. This is why I love history. Now, Colonel Charles Young was the one that had died. We just saluted his flag-draped casket. See, a lot of people don't know that when he was a lieutenant, he had a sergeant turned sergeant major by the name of Benjamin O. Davis Sr. See, we already talked about how smart Colonel Charles Young was. Well, what he did was he encouraged Davis' ambition to become an officer. Young tutored Davis of all the subjects that were covered in the officer candidate test, and the rest is history. Somehow, Colonel Charles Young passed that torch on to Benjamin O. Davis Sr. So he got his start. And just so you know, there's a resolution on now for Colonel Charles Young, has been on the books for a while with President Obama to get him posthumously promoted to general. Okay? But you have so many in addition to this, where you had the Harlem Hellfighters that helped secure the victory of World War I. It was said that the Harlem Hellfighters spent long weeks at the front and more time in the trenches than any other U.S. unit. It was no coincidence that earlier this month, President Obama awarded the Medal of Honor to Harlem Hellfighter Private Henry Johnson for his action during World War I, for risking his own life and sustaining life-threatening wounds to save a brother in arms. You know, it's amazing when you look at how the dots connect. You know, Benjamin O. Davis Sr. was also a professor of military science at Tuskegee. Anybody, how many folks knew that? So who came behind him shortly thereafter at Tuskegee? His son. His son did. Because now we go down south again to Tuskegee, Alabama, where sit a group of men, which one of them became that first general, first three-star Air Force General Benjamin O. Davis Jr., who led the world famous, and you heard the history, Tuskegee Airmen on Moulton Field. I've been to Moulton Field. I'm amazed at how everything is still as it was then. Now, after General Davis gets off the train, there was another one of these men that was on the train who also gets up proudly to exit the train. You see, he had been drafted at the age of 18 in 1943 and entered the Army Air Corps. He was trained as an aircraft sheet metal worker at the Aircraft Technical School, as was assigned to repair aircraft bodies, bullet hole punctures, and damage to B-25 bombers. After 30 months of service, he was honorably discharged to later attend Howard University, to later graduate with a degree of business from Federal City College in Washington, D.C., where he later served with the U.S. Postal Inspection Service until his retirement. This man who exited the train is none other than Major L. Anderson III, who is graciously joining us today. Next to exit the train is a man who joined the enlisted corps in 1942, who landed on the Omaha Beach in 1944 with his unit that earned battle stars for service in Normandy and northern France. And this individual ended up being the director of military training in Germany. Now, I don't know that he's with us today, but Dr. Ivan Ware. Let's give him a round of applause. We thank him for his service. We also have another individual I know that was supposed to be here today that we'd like to acknowledge that was on the train by the name of William T. Fauntleroy. Give him a round of applause as well. You see, this is indelibly entwined with American history, as countless missions were conducted to protect American bombers during World War II as the red tails of then the Army Air Corps. As all on the train witness a low-level flyby by the Tuskegee Red Tails, the train takes off again. See, the train travels through World War II to see so many heroes in every service. I want to hear something from the Marines. We remember the Montfort Port Marines. Hoorah! The first African Americans to enlist in the Marine Corps. Despite their segregation from the white Marines in traditional training camps, serving in the Pacific during World War II and even beyond, the Montfort Port Marines proved they were just as capable as all Marines, regardless of their race, color, creed, and national origin. Elsewhere in the Navy, At the height of World War II, 13 African American men gathered at the Great Lakes Naval Station in Illinois to begin a course that would prepare them to be the U.S. Navy's first African American officers on active duty. Despite the rigors of the course, the high stakes, all 13 were commissioned and became known as the Golden 13. They made history and became trailblazers, charting the course for even the first African American female four-star general, Admiral Michelle Howard. See, in 1944, there were other American pioneers jumped their way into history, quite literally, as a contingent of African Americans serving at Fort Benning, Georgia, would go through parachute training after completing their daily duties. They ran, did push-ups, and trained just as the white paratroopers did, making an impression on the commanding general. At the request of the general, they would become the first all-American paratrooper test platoon and affectionately known as the Triple Nickels. Hooah! After the 555th Parachute Infantry Battalion, as we are proud of their contributions and smile in gratification for their service, the train takes off again. But this stop it's unlike the other stops. See, this stop was outside the continent of the United States. Confusion everywhere. There was confusion here. The year is 1968. Riots, fires, unrest here, unrest there. Bombs and grenades going off in the distance as the conductor yells. Next stop, Republic of Vietnam, 1968. As the train come to a uncontrollable abrupt stop, Specialist 5, Clarence Eugene Sasser, dove off the train. He was serving as a medical aidman on a reconnaissance in-force operation. His company was making an air assault when suddenly it was taken under heavy small arms recoilless rifle, machine, and rocket fire from a fortified enemy position on three sides. Anybody know what an L-shaped ambush is? This is an L-shaped ambush. But three sides, only one thing worse than a three-side ambush, and that's an O shape. And you don't want to be in it, okay? But I'm here to tell you, without hesitation, Specialist Sasser ran across an open rice paddy through a hail of fire to assist the wounded. After helping one man to safety being painfully wounded and refusing medical attention, he ran through a barrage of rocket and automatic weapon fire to aid captains on an initial attack, and after giving them urgently needed treatment, continued to search for other wounded. Despite him getting 2 additional wounds, immobilizing him, he treated one, proceeded on to encourage another group, crawled 200 meters to relative safety. There he attended their wounds for 5 hours until they were evacuated, and he was later awarded the Medal of Honor by the President of the United States. Now, just before the train began to head home, outside it had a few other stops. For during this time, there was an individual, it was a warrior, getting on and off the train that oversaw 28 crises, including the invasion of Panama, Operation Desert Storm, during the Persian Gulf, and he finally goes and the train returns to Washington. Things and times have changed. See, the train is now a metro. It's a metro train. As this warrior looks at the conductor of the train and renders a snappish salute and glances and nods at a young lady sitting on the metro train that will soon arrive in Washington as well, and as he gets off, remains in Washington. See, he's none other than the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Colin Powell, who was the highest military position in the Department of Defense. However, this would not be this warrior's last stop as he enters back on the metro in a crisp, tailored suit with a blue tie, and he travels to the White House to have the President of the United States swear him in as the United States Secretary of State. Oh man, all of us are bursting with pride As we smile and wave at Honorable Secretary of State Powell, the young lady snaps to, stands up, straightens her uniform. As the onlookers admire her uniform, they are amazed at all she wore and had earned on her uniform. This young lady from Washington, D.C., who had graduated from the West Point, had deployed during Operation Desert Storm, Desert Shield, Gulf War. She had worked on the Army Joint Staff and commanded a medical command, a hospital, and was a division surgeon. As a conductor of the train, signed her confirmation on a piece of paper. Off majestically walks Lieutenant General Naja West as the highest ranking African American woman in the Army and the 44th U.S. Army Surgeon General who got promoted this month. Let's give her a round of applause, folks. Now, she departs the train, and we have heard throughout the ride that many acknowledge the conductor of the train. Well, Harriet Tubman, she smiled and nodded. Colin Powell saluted. Conductor signed the papers to make Naja West a lieutenant general. Who was the conductor? Well, as the metro train is now escorted by helicopters, motorcades, motorcycles alike, it pulls into a station near the White House where Secret Service men are waiting for the exit of our commander-in-chief, none other than the 44th President of the United States, President Barack Obama. Give him a round of applause. Now, you know how he walks. So he smartly exits the train and gets into his awaiting car. As we begin to worry, because the president is no longer driving the train. Well, it was just then he opens the door of his car, stands up, looks over to all of us on the train and points and says, God is in control. Remember, he's always in control. It's your turn now. It's your turn now. Where are you going on this train, and what are you going to do? God bless you, and God bless the United States of America. He then shut his door and departed. In closing, as the train now rests in this room, before it starts to move again, that's the question for each and every one of you. Where will you go? What will you do? What will be your contribution and lasting legacy? For you may not be the lily of the valley. You might not be that oak tree that sits on top of the hill. You might not be that bright and morning star. But I pray that wherever you go and whatever you do, that God Almighty will allow you to be the absolute best of whatever you are. God bless you, and thank you for inviting me.
Thank you, Colonel Dillard, for that inspiring speech. We really appreciate it. Motivated, encouraged, and that's exactly what we're here for. So we definitely want to say thank you to you once again. We would now like to welcome the president of the East Coast chapter, Mr. Jerry Burton, for some closing remarks. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. And thank you for coming out to this event once again. First, I want to make sure I recognize the panel. They are there for a reason. They have done good things for us and are doing good things for the chapter. And I want to thank you all for being here and showing up. Thank you. Next, I want to recognize the members of the East Coast chapter. Could you all please stand and be recognized? This bunch is sometimes quiet and they like to go off into the shadows, but in the red jackets today, they cannot do that. And I appreciate you all for all the work you're doing. Talk about work. Committee members, please stand up. You have done a wonderful job. Wonderful. I want to recognize those that cannot be here today. First, one of the committee members, Quinn Patterson. He is still out recovering from surgery, so he will get back to us soon. He better. He's a vice president, so I got some things on my list for him to do. This is the 75th anniversary of the Tuskegee experience. 75 years. 1941 is when it started, officially. Now, there were some unofficial things that happened before and some after, but officially 1941. So I'm going to give you a few of those hallowed ground locations and some of those years that encompass the Tuskegee Airmen experience. First, I'm going to start with 1936. Benjamin O. Davis Jr. graduated from West Point. 1936 also, Jesse Owens went to Berlin and won those 4 medals. (1939) Civilian Pilot Training Program, 6 higher schools of learning. West Virginia State College, North Carolina A&T, Delaware State College, Tuskegee Institute, Hampton Institute, and Howard University. All hallowed grounds. Personnel at Chanute Field, 1941, started maintenance training. That was March, and I'd like to mention those months because it's going to maybe ring, people will say, I might need to read about this. That was March 1941 maintenance. 6 officers transferred from Tuskegee University or Institute to Chanute Field for the maintenance program. In July 1941, that's when the pilot training program got underway with 13 aviation cadets. Maintenance first, then pilots. So for all of us that are enlisted, here we are. All right. That was my shout out for my enlisted. 1944, 1946, the 477th Bombardment Group was in existence. 1944, 1946, those were B-25 bomber air crew. And they went to Selfridge Field, Michigan, Godman, Kentucky, Freeman Field, home of the mutiny, and then Lockbourne Army Airfield in Columbus, Ohio. And I mention all of those when you think about their short existence. Why was there such turmoil at that time in those locations? In order to train, you cannot move and train. You have to pack and move and then unpack. You can't train. So constant moving means that they were not deemed ready to go into battle. So they never made it into battle. They were ready. Because when they finally got a place to do their training, they got themselves ready. But the war ended. So a good thing that the war ended. More than 16,000 original Tuskegee airmen and women served. They call themselves, and we call them, original Tuskegee Airmen, 1941 to 1949. They were in locations of South Carolina, Oklahoma, Alabama, Mississippi. They went to all these hallowed grounds, and they served and they did the job that that they were told to do, and they didn't have a problem with it, and they didn't know that eventually they would be called Tuskegee Airmen and Women. They also didn't know in 2006, Congress would vote and authorize a medal, the Congressional Gold Medal, awarded in 2007 in the Capitol Rotunda. Some 300 Tuskegee Airmen, women, widows, and heritage members received that medal in honor of all 16,000 plus Tuskegee Airmen and women. Another place of hallowed ground. So with that, I'm done with my history today. I want to speak to the young people. I want to thank you for coming out. I hope this isn't the last time you are part of our organization. We offer flight training, which Mr. Nelson Evans talked about. We also offer grants. Locally, $1,000 each to graduating high school seniors. Our national organization also offers $1,500 scholarships, graduating high school seniors. Once you are in the East Coast chapter pipeline, you can come back to us with your grades, and we will give you another $1,000 for your 4 years of education. So please, I mention that because sometimes we have a problem finding young people to give our money to. So, yes, unbelievable but true. We ask you, take the time, fill out the applications, do the essay, and take our money. Okay. So with that, I would like to call Colonel Dillard back to the stage. For those people that are in the military, you probably already know what's going to happen. There's always something that's going to go for an outstanding performer. And the presentation that Colonel Dillard delivered today, he took a little pressure off of me. I didn't have to deliver all of my notes, and I appreciate that. He also tied in some things that maybe I'll use another time. But on behalf of the East Coast chapter, again, the Congressional Gold Medal was awarded to original Tuskegee Airmen and women. There's only one gold medal, only one, and that is at the National Air and Space Museum downtown, second floor. They have an exhibit. The others got gold or bronze replicas. So I would like to award Colonel Dillard with this replica of the Congressional Gold Medal. For those, again, that's military, it's usually done a different way. I can't do the whole thing now, but we're going to do it. We're going to replicate that presentation. Now, Mr. Hilliard, Cadet Hilliard, you didn't get your pilot's license yet?
Not yet.
But there's time,
Yes.
and for us that wish we were 15 to 19 years of age in the DC metro area, close to the East Coast chapter Tuskegee Airmen, that could be in the program, you still got time.
Yes, I do. Thank you.
Man, y'all know that is too tall for me. Okay, we wanted to recognize a lot of people that weren't able to be here, but there were quite a few that were here. Velocity Capital, who's a new developer in Camp Springs, donated an entire table to the program, so let's give them a hand. A portion of the people in here know me. So everyone that's tied to CECR, please stand for a moment. That would be their family. That's you too. Okay, why is everybody at that table sitting there looking at me? These are your community activists that are making a change positively for our children in the community. Give them a hand. Thank you. And last but not least, our community partners, Air Force Association and Andrews Federal Credit Union, who is now the partner, community partner with the Sustainable Business Community Network.